The city of Los Angeles never sleeps. Its neon signs buzz through the darkness. Traffic flows like blood through concrete veins, and 8 million people rest behind locked doors, trusting in the safety of their homes. But during the summer of 1985, Los Angeles didn't sleep because it was afraid. An entire metropolis held its breath, waiting for something unspeakable to emerge from the shadows. Locked doors weren't enough. Bolted windows didn't matter. Alarm systems became as common as morning coffee, because something evil had awakened in the City of Angels, and it moved in the dark. He crept through suburban neighborhoods like a ghost made flesh, through Glendale, through Monrovia, through Sun Valley, leaving behind only carnage, terror, and questions that had no answers. They called him the Night Stalker. This is the story of Richard Ramirez, and the nightmare he unleashed on California that summer, a nightmare so real, so random, so brutal, that it changed how an entire city thought about safety forever. Born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, Richard Ramirez entered the world on a leap year as if fate itself was marking him as different, unusual, set apart from ordinary time. He was the youngest of 5 children in a working-class Mexican-American family. His father, Julian, was a former police officer from Mexico who had crossed the border seeking the American dream. But Julian was a strict disciplinarian, often violent, ruling his household with an iron fist and explosive temper. As a child, Richard was quiet, almost invisible in his large family. He was shy, withdrawn, and plagued by severe epileptic seizures that would drop him to the ground without warning. The seizures were so violent that some wondered if they were damaging something fundamental in his developing brain. But something much darker was brewing beneath that silence. Something that had nothing to do with medical conditions and everything to do with the human capacity for evil. At the age of 12, Richard found what he thought was a role model. His older cousin, Miguel. Miguel was a decorated Vietnam War veteran who had served multiple tours in the jungles of Southeast Asia. He had seen combat, survived firefights, and returned home with medals and stories. But Miguel had brought something else back from the war, something that should have stayed buried in those distant jungles. He showed young Richard Polaroid photographic, disturbing images of women he claimed to have raped, mutilated, and murdered during his service overseas. Any normal child would have been horrified, traumatized, would have run screaming to their parents. Instead, Richard was fascinated. He studied those photographs with the intense curiosity that other children reserve for comic books or baseball cards. He was being groomed, shaped, prepared for something unspeakable. Then came the moment that would shatter Richard's psyche forever. One afternoon, he watched as Miguel shot his own wife in the face during a domestic argument. The woman Richard had known as his aunt fell dead right in front of him, her blood spattering the walls of the family home. That moment snapped something inside Richard that could never be repaired. He began breaking into homes throughout El Paso. At first, just stealing small items, testing boundaries, seeing how far he could push before someone pushed back. He became obsessed with Satanism, with horror movies, with death metal music that screamed about violence and darkness. He collected images of serial killers like trading cards, studying their methods, their techniques, their philosophies, and by the time he moved to California in his early 20s, drifting westward like so many lost souls, seeking Richard Ramirez was no longer a troubled boy from El Paso. He was a predator, fully formed, completely without empathy, and ready to hunt. June 28, 1984. Los Angeles. The city was still innocent then, still believing that random violence was something that happened to other people, in other places, at other times. 79-year-old Jenny Vinco lived alone in a small apartment in Glassell Park. She was retired, quiet, the kind of neighbor who kept to herself, but always had a kind word for the children in the building. On that June morning, she was found stabbed to death in her own bedroom. Her throat had been slashed so violently that she was nearly decapitated. Her frail body bore signs of mutilation and sexual assault that spoke to a level of cruelty that defied understanding. There was no clear motive, no robbery gone wrong, no domestic dispute, no connection to organized crime. Just pure, inexplicable savagery unleashed on an innocent woman who had never harmed anyone in her 79 years on Earth. No one knew it yet, but this was Richard Ramirez's first confirmed kill, the moment he crossed the line from petty criminal to something far more dangerous. And having tasted blood, having felt the rush of absolute power over another human being, he would never go back. Almost a year passed. Los Angeles forgot about Jenny Ving. Her case went cold, filed away with thousands of other unsolved murders. Life moved on. The city breathed easy. But Richard hadn't forgotten. He had been planning, preparing, evolving. And when he finally emerged from the shadows again, he would bring with him a level of terror that would paralyze an entire metropolitan area. March 17, 1985. The killing resumed with a vengeance. Shocked even seasoned homicide detectives. 22-year-old Maria Hernandez was returning home to her apartment in Rosemead after a long day at work. She was young, vibrant, planning her future, looking forward to the weekend. As she stepped out of her car, a figure emerged from the shadows and shot her in the face at point-blank range. By some miracle, a deflection off her car keys, a slight movement at the crucial moment, the bullet missed her brain by millimeters. Maria survived, though she would carry the physical and emotional scars forever. She ran, bleeding, screaming, as her attacker followed her into the apartment she shared with her roommate. Her roommate, Dale Okazaki, wasn't so fortunate. Richard Ramirez executed her at close range with the same .22 caliber revolver, showing no more emotion than someone swatting a fly. Just 1 hour later, across town in Monterey Park, he struck again. Saileon knew. A 30-year-old law student was dragged from her car and shot multiple times. 3 victims in one night. The randomness was terrifying. Different neighborhoods, different weapons, different victim types. No consistent method, except the consistency of cruelty. He wasn't trying to hide his crimes or cover his tracks. He was trying to terrify an entire city, and it was working perfectly. By summer of 1985, Los Angeles was gripped by a primal fear unlike anything in its modern history. This wasn't gang violence confined to certain neighborhoods. This wasn't domestic disputes or robberies gone wrong. Richard Ramirez didn't care who his victims were. Young or old, rich or poor, white, Hispanic, Asian. He was an equal opportunity monster. He killed couples sleeping peacefully in their beds. He raped grandmothers in front of their grandchildren. He bludgeoned children with hammers and tire irons. His method was always the same. Break into homes in the dead of night, moving like a shadow through sliding glass doors, unlocked windows, any point of entry that offered access to sleeping victims. Sometimes he used a gun, different calibers, different makes, impossible to trace. Other times, he grabbed whatever was available. Kitchen knives, hammers from tool sheds, tire irons from garages. The weapon didn't matter. The terror did. Sometimes he tied victims up with electrical cords or phone cables, forcing them to participate in satanic rituals before killing them. He would draw pentagrams on walls using their blood, or carve the symbols into their flesh while they were still alive. He would often force victims to swear to Satan before ending their lives, whispering blasphemous chants and claiming to be a servant of darkness. The psychological torture was often worse than the physical violence. The response was immediate and citywide. Hardware stores couldn't keep locks in stock. Security system companies were booked solid for months. Gun stores saw lines around the block as law-abiding citizens armed themselves against an enemy they couldn't identify or predict. People started sleeping with knives and baseball bats under their pillows. Parents moved their children into the master bedroom, afraid to let them sleep alone. Every creak in the floor, every dog barking in the distance, every car engine in the night felt like a warning. By August, entire neighborhoods were ghost towns. After sunset, children were kept indoors. Dating came to a standstill. Los Angeles, a city famous for its nightlife, became a city that feared the dark. The media dubbed him the Night Stalker, and the name stuck like a curse. It perfectly captured what he had become. Not just a killer, but the living embodiment of every urban nightmare. Every childhood fear of monsters in the closet made real. What made Richard Ramirez different from other serial killers wasn't just his brutality, it was his symbolism. He wasn't killing for money or passion or even sexual gratification alone. He was killing for his dark master. At crime scenes, he would draw pentagrams on walls using lipstick, blood, or whatever was available. Sometimes he carved them into victims' flesh while they were still alive, turning their bodies into altars for his twisted worship. One survivor, Inez Erickson, reported that he whispered "Hail Satan" during her assault, his breath reeking of decay and evil. At another scene, he drew a pentagram on a victim's thigh using her own lipstick, a signature that would haunt investigators. His appearance matched his inner darkness. He wore all black clothing like a uniform of evil. He never bathed, creating a stench that preceded him into rooms. His teeth were rotting, his breath putrid, as if decay was consuming him from within. Some survivors said he didn't seem human, that his eyes were completely black, that he moved with unnatural silence, that he radiated a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. He told one victim, "I am a servant of the Dark One," speaking with the conviction of a true believer. He believed he was untouchable, protected by supernatural forces beyond the reach of human law. And for a terrifying stretch of months in 1985, it seemed like he might be right. But not every victim went down quietly. Some survivors fought back with a courage that ultimately helped bring the Night Stalker down. One elderly woman, Sophie Dickman, did something remarkable when Ramirez broke into her home. She talked to him calmly, fearlessly, even offering him food and drink. Her complete lack of fear seemed to confuse him, and he left her alive one of the few times he showed anything resembling mercy. Inez Erickson, despite being brutally assaulted, memorized every detail of his face. Her detailed description helped police create the first accurate composite sketch that would eventually lead to his identification. There were others who hid in closets and lived to describe his voice. Victims who escaped through windows and remembered his car. Survivors who fought back with kitchen knives and pool cues, leaving him wounded and more vulnerable. Every act of defiance, every moment of courage, every survivor who lived to tell their story gave police one more piece of the puzzle. The net was slowly closing, though Ramirez didn't know it yet. The pressure from the public, the media, and politicians was mounting to unprecedented levels. This wasn't just about solving murders anymore, it was about restoring faith in the fundamental safety of urban life. As the body count rose, so did the scale of the manhunt. The LAPD, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, and the FBI formed an unprecedented joint task force. Hundreds of detectives were pulled from other cases. But Ramirez was careful about evidence. He wore gloves. He chose different weapons. He struck in different jurisdictions to confuse investigations. He moved between Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Orange County like a ghost. For months, it felt like he was everywhere and nowhere. Dozens of suspects were questioned and released. Hundreds of tips led to dead ends. The city was losing faith in law enforcement's ability to stop him. Then, on August 24, 1985, Richard Ramirez made his first critical mistake. He stole a car in Los Angeles. Not unusual for him, but this time he left something behind. A single, clear fingerprint on the rearview mirror. Police ran it through the newly computerized fingerprint data. After hours of processing, a match came back. Richard Ramirez, age 25, drifter with a long rap sheet of petty crimes, drug possession, and burglary arrests. They had a name. They had a face. They had an address, though he was long gone from his last known residence. His mugshot was released to every news outlet in California. By August 30th, Richard Ramirez's face was on every newspaper, every television screen, every wanted poster from San Diego to San Francisco. The most wanted man in California had nowhere left to hide. August 31st, 1985, Richard Ramirez stepped off a Greyhound bus at the downtown Los Angeles terminal, returning from a trip to Arizona where he had been visiting family, completely unaware that his face was now the most recognizable in California. He walked to a nearby newsstand to buy a magazine, and saw his own mugshot staring back at him from dozens of newspaper front pages. Night Stalker identified screamed the headlines. His reign of terror was over, and he knew it. Panicked for the first time in his criminal career, he ran through downtown streets, through residential neighborhoods, through backyards and alleys, desperate to disappear one more time into the shadows that had protected him for so long. But this time, the city fought back. Residents who had lived in fear for months recognized him immediately. They pointed, they shouted, they gave chase. The hunter had become the hunt. In East Los Angeles, a group of civilians cornered him in a backyard. They beat him with pipes, sticks, and anything else they could find. They held him down with a fury born from months of terror, months of sleepless nights, months of fear. When police finally arrived, they had to protect Richard Ramirez from the mob that wanted to tear him apart. The Night Stalker was no longer a phantom stalking the city. He was real, he was bleeding, and he was finished. For the first time in over a year, Los Angeles could breathe again. The nightmare was over. Evil had been given a name, a face, and a pair of handcuffs. Richard Ramirez would eventually be tried, convicted, and sentenced to death for his crimes. He spent 23 years on death row before dying of cancer in 2013. Never executed, never truly paying the full price for the terror he unleashed. But the scars he left behind run deeper than individual lives lost. He shattered something fundamental about urban safety, about the illusion that locked doors and good neighborhoods could protect us from true evil. The Night Stalker is gone, but the fear he created never truly disappeared, because it wasn't just about the murders, it was about how random they were, how close he got, how real the danger felt. Even decades later, a part of Los Angeles still remembers, still watches, still listens for footsteps in the dark, for evil without warning, for monsters who smile. And we remember his name, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. A reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that are completely, utterly human. Subscribe for more stories that make you question everything.